Am I going? Yeah. Sorry, this is cheating slightly, but I have a question for Parvati. Did you manage to examine the impact of the shape of the crater, the depth and the slope and all that on the amount of stuff coming out?
You want to start to be all up here so that you get to the microphone.
Hey, Alicia. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I do have a case where I looked at a depth to diameter of 0.1 just to see how that would change, but I didn't plot it. I mean, it seems like generally deeper crater, less gets out. And I don't know if it gets more interesting than that. I think, you know, if you consider a bowl-shaped crater versus a flat-floored crater, there might be some interesting differences there. Has something to do with the sky view factor. So look at it a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Christina, do you know why those band positions are shifting as a function of temperature there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the band position shifts slightly, and returning that to broadening and a narrowing at another part of the band. So it's more a function of the changing shape of the band as well.
Go ahead.
Amanda?
I'm Barbara Cohen,
Sorry,
as I got it. I had a question for Parvati and for Casey about the diffusion of the molecules that you've looked at, water and methane and these molecules. How long does that diffusive gradient last before it gets messed up by further micrometeorites? So when we're looking at this for Viper, as we're approaching one of these, are we expecting to see a gradient with M solo and Nervous, or is it just sort of a diffuse halo at some point?
Good question. I don't know that I know how to answer this. Do you...
So Barb, sorry, like it is echoey up here, like someone was saying yesterday, but you were asking, would we expect to see a gradient with distance from a...
Right. So I think some of the work that you're showing, initially we start off with a gradient, which makes sense.
And
but
then you were saying it would diffuse.
Yeah, well, eventually it's going to diffuse and maybe come back to background, or maybe just get diffused out to the point where it's not a gradient. Maybe it's just an enhancement. Like, do you have expectations for what Viper will see?
So one of the things I wanted to do was like to really be able to compare. Like I wanted to include some of the really high resolution temperature maps that I'm trying to get it working before I contact Matt for high resolution maps. But I think it will be important to sort of put the temperature in and maybe also consider migration to get a handle on that. So I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see. I mean, another thing that I don't model, I think Kennedy talked about this to some extent. Some of the others mentioned this also, but diffusion into the subsurface.
Right.
And maybe Tom has some comments.
That can happen, and another thing that can happen is when it leaves, you just put all the energy into the translational coordinate, right? So you have some effective temperature, right? But if it's vibrating, then when it hits, it can break. And then it's no longer going to move around because it's destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm really motivated by when we see something with Viper or another mission, is it going to be non-unique? Right. And all of these things are happening. And so we're going to see some state, and we're not necessarily going to be able to say, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. You're all nodding your head, which is not. I wanted you to shake your head and say, no, we're going to know.
No, I mean, it's nothing unique actually when it comes to ice. But yeah, I mean, that I think is the beauty of modeling and trying to do as many measurements as you can ahead of time so that you can have as much information to compare it to the mission data, right?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I have another take on that too. You know, when we're doing Viper, we might be seeing things that look very similar to the day before or to a week before, but you know, we might be able to see
those variations after the mission and after we've, cleaned the data looking at temperatures and time of day variation. So it might not be real time that we notice the variations, but we might be able to see it after. I just want to ask if there's any online questions. No, okay, we'll continue.
Okay, this question is for Casey. From I think your first talk, but I might have lost track. Let's see, you were talking about diurnal variability in 2 different sites, I think. And I think the Viper site, I think you showed a drop in water abundance, or maybe it was OH abundance from, I think, 1 o'clock local time to 3 o'clock local time. And I was wondering about your explanation for that, and if that is due to, let's see, I'm sorry, was that a drop in abundance or an increase in abundance? And was that related to temperature change?
Yeah, so what we saw with at the Viper site was a drop in molecular water from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. We saw the same same kind of drop at Mauritius in molecular water from it was 10 a.m. to noon. So what I think is happening is that it's temperature related, because time of day is temperature related. So as the surface is warming, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. is actually probably one of the warmer parts of the lunar day. So we're seeing a continued decrease with temperature, with molecular water leaving hot surfaces.
So there was a drop in abundance as the temperature dropped?
As the temperature warmed. I need to verify that, but that's it's with time of day, and I believe that's also with temperature. I just need to calculate the temperatures.
Okay, and so that was the same in both locations?
Yeah.
Okay, neat, thanks.
Yeah, this is Shirley from University of Hawaii. I have a follow-up question regarding this. Seems like the diurnal variation is very strong, right? It's like a 200 ppm. Do you have any explanation for the mechanisms?
So it is very strong. I am kind of concerned about how strong the variation is, and I want to be sure before we go and, make any claims that this diurnal variation is this strong, that the abundances we're measuring are correct. So these are preliminary results. We have a lot of data cleaning to do, and, looking at more locations, because, we have those big maps. And there's more locations that we can look at for the diurnal variation, see if those other locations are showing a similar drop in abundance. But also the 6 micron band, we're using more glasses to do the calibration. So we're going from flux to radiance to emission to reflectance to get to the abundance. So it's kind of a long process, and whether or not we truly believe the abundance is 200 ppm during the diurnal variation is, another question, but there is some type of variation happening.
Thanks. Can I ask a question for Andrew? Do you think could be like a destruction for ice, like from those charged particles? If yes, how much do you estimate?
Yeah, I have no idea. That's beyond. I'm just looking only at the input into the ice. So that'd be for the lab folks to tell you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, Paul Sabo, UC Berkeley. I have a question for Tom. With the electrons playing an additional role for water formation, how would you think this affects regions with large lunar magnetic anomalies?
Okay, there is an echo here. So
okay.
Your question is with the electrons adding an additional water source term, would their effect be with the lunar anomalies? Is that what you said?
Yeah, within the
and lunar anomalies meaning the magnetic anomalies. Well, the electrons will be interacting with the magnetic field or deflected by the magnetic field. So, that component of it, which is the sort of the non-thermal channel, will maybe turned off with at the lunar anomaly, and the protons need to get there. So that's the point. You need both things to happen. You need the proton to implant, makes the hydroxyl. You could have hydrogen that's implanted and it's got and there's sort of trapped H2 molecules, right? The electron then interacts with one or both of those, and it's sort of that electronic excitation that causes another hydrogen atom to sort of attach to the OH. Unless both of those are happening, you're not going to get this sort of electron stimulated process. So, if you prevent either of those from happening at a magnetic anomaly, it's going to be diminished.
Thank you.
I just want to check if there's any more online questions. Nope. All right. Any other questions in the room?
For Alicia, in your experiments, I didn't catch what energies you were using, and because you're using the regolith, do you do any jostling or moving of that sample so that you can get more even irradiation on the surface, or is it just a single surface that you radiate over time? No, that's for Alicia. Yeah.
I was going to say, you're in the lab,
Hey, so second question first. Our beam size is bigger than our sample size. So the whole surface is being irradiated. We don't shake it at all. Can you remind me what your first question was? Oh, 2 keV H2 plus, which we believe is equivalent to 1 keV protons.
Hi, Matt Sigler, PSI. So for Parvati, I was kind of wondering, looking at your thing, should we look for ice in clusters of craters mostly? Like, because then they're kind of trading water back and forth. I mean, that's what I was thinking about looking at your distributions is looking what craters around it was hitting. Is that then a smarter place to look for higher concentrations?
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Like one of the things I want to do is to do the math to see, like how significant is that flux really? Like how long does it take to build up an observable amount? But maybe, I think there's also some spatial scale there, like the ballistic, I think it's going to be related to the separation between the craters and the ballistic hop length in some way. And I guess as I was thinking, you always think of something after you've answered the question, but like related to Barb's question, like I think we're not gonna, I think these things aren't unique, but maybe what we can do is like come up with some sort of probability. So if we measure water in a location, what's the probability that it came from this crater or that crater or from somewhere else on the moon? So I think it's going to be it's going to be very probabilistic, I think. And yeah, maybe plus we'll look everywhere.
Do I have time for one more? So this is a sort of a comment / question for Abigail. The abundances of hydration that you're detecting during eclipse are not that far off from what we think we're measuring with LAMP, right? And I think that you have a unique technique there, and I think it's really interesting. And maybe there's something there, and maybe we need to do more LADI-like measurements in the atmosphere, right? To really kind of get an in situ handle on this. Yeah. But in our studies, we kind of considered that not all of the water that we think is desorbing is making it up to the LADI altitude. Mm-hmm. Right. And so maybe that can have be involved in the explanation for why we're not seeing as little as LADI measured, for instance. Anyway, I'm kind of thinking about this and wonder if you have any more thoughts on that.
No, yeah, and I would be curious about how like it could be combined with other processes like the formation of hydroxyl and things, though that's complicated by the fact that my observations at least are in the magnetotail. I can't remember if yours were off the top of my head as well. So then the source of protons is somewhat depleted by that. So yeah, I basically just agree with what you're saying. Yeah, I would love more exospheric measurements to kind of put more constraint on that. And yeah, it's interesting to see the two different techniques kind of work, but show slightly different things. And it's just, yeah. No,
Right. Maybe
yeah,
there's
I don't see
something
how it
there.
all comes together.
But I think Carly has a follow-on comment question.
No, this is not a follow-up. This is just a aha.
Oh,
I've been mulling about the diurnal effects that we see. And I probably inaccurately had have assumed, well, it comes and it goes and it comes and it goes. But now I'm beginning to think, well, maybe it goes to the lunar atmosphere and then, so it doesn't have to be recreated every day.
Right.
So what is the story? Where does it go? Where does it come from? We've got the experts here.
Yeah. No, that's, oh.
I just want to say, I think diffusion is part of the process. You know, it doesn't go up or down. It can like surface and exosphere. I think it goes down to and can hang out.
So it can
there.
go both directions.
Yeah, both ways. So it's not like mutually exclusive. Right. Exactly. With my comment.
Oh, okay. So we're not losing water. We're just recycling it. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah. So in the model that we presented, you're forcing it to migrate to the poles. And you're forcing it to migrate to sort of the cold parts. As you have a thermal excursion
Yeah.
where you can have thermal desorption, it'll thermally desorb.
Yeah.
But it's at a thermal velocity distribution, so there's no Jeans escape. It has to come back somewhere, right? And so then it sort of moves around on the surface. And if it comes back in a polar region that is cold, it sticks.
Yeah.
It stays. So it's sort of this redistribution thing that happens.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying going to the poles is essentially a loss. So that means that if it's going to do this cycling, it has to be recreated too. So we've got a little bit of a loss and then a.
Yeah. And then what we kind of stumbled on is that with which try is there is another creation process that happens when the electrons hit. And then there is a creation process that happens when you have a thermal excursion. And I actually think that's that bump that you see because it's really close to the, and, it's not, so it's maybe not a very good source term for the normal thermal variation. It's a big source term for thermal variations that are brought about by impact events or micrometeorites because they rely on more temperature. So, anyway.
I wanted to make a comment on that as well, Tom, was that there are lost sources from the PSRs as well, right? Bill showed that you can get ion sputtering from the PSRs. And of course, micrometeorite bombardment inside a PSR can also represent that redistribution outside of those cold traps.
I think this is a really great discussion and I think we could go on for a long time. So I'm just going to say, let's congregate personally so that we can let other people get to the poster session and discuss this further. Thank you, everyone. This was a great session.